Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ksenia and I make videos for people who are going through the family immigration process. I'm not an attorney. My videos are based on public information, my own experience, and the experience of my subscribers. And the purpose of my channel is to give you guys the confidence to go through this process completely on your own. If you're watching this video, it is likely that you have already received a request for evidence that relates to your affidavit of support. In today's video, I'm going to dissect 5 most common types of RFEs that are related specifically to the affidavit of support. And some of them may or may not be applicable to you. But I recommend that you look at every single sample in this video because in between, I will be giving general tips that could be applicable in your case. Very often, you do not need an attorney to respond to this request for evidence. But if after watching this video, you are still unsure what to do, then in that case, I think you should consult with an attorney. So let's look at the first type of RFE here. The top is going to be the same for everybody. So it will say that it is a request for evidence for the form I-485. The reason being is that the affidavit of support 864 form is directly related to your form I-485 adjustment of status. They explain why they are writing to you. They will tell you that they cannot continue to adjust your status without specific issues that need to be corrected, and you must include a copy of all pages of this letter with your response to request for evidence. So this first type of RFE has to do with them not being able to determine that your petitioning sponsor qualifies, and then they will explain that in order to qualify, the petitioning sponsor's form must be properly completed and signed, and the supporting documents must establish that the petitioner sponsor meets income requirement of 125%. And if you are not sure where to find these guidelines, you can Google i-864P and it will take you to a page with a table that describes, based on the household size, how much the sponsor needs to be making. So just in this first paragraph, plus the information that I just told you, you may already have figured out what the issue was exactly with your form. So look back at your I-864 form and see if your petitioning sponsor's income is close to or just below or barely above the guidelines. They do then tell you that if the petitioning sponsor's income is not enough, you must obtain a qualifying joint sponsor or, as they say, submit evidence of assets. So they do tell you that if you do decide to obtain a joint sponsor, you will need to submit a form I-864 from the joint sponsor. So an additional form I-864, and it must be of the latest edition date. You must also indicate the sponsor's social security number in the form. So you don't need to provide a copy of their social security card, but you will need to include their number in the form. They also ask that you calculate the joint sponsor's household size correctly. You will need to provide their federal income tax return and include their W-2s, 1099s, or tax schedules, whatever else is included in their forms for the most recent tax year. You also must submit evidence of the joint sponsor's status as a United States citizen, national, or a lawful permanent resident. So in order to be your joint sponsor, they must be one of the 3. So they also tell you that in order to qualify, your income must be reflected on the tax returns in the total income line. So on the IRS form 1040, it is line 9. So this could be another clue for you what was wrong with your petitioner's form. For example, you looked at the wrong income line on the petitioner's tax returns. Maybe your petitioning sponsor's income tax returns for the most recent year did not show an amount required by USCIS. So this kind of RFE also often happens when a petitioning sponsor has taxes from the most recent year, but those taxes do not meet the income requirement, and the applicant and the petitioning sponsor assume that they can simply provide evidence of current income to USCIS. But USCIS doesn't only look at the current income proof. They do also look at the total income line from the most recent year's tax returns. They also talk about you providing assets. If you do not choose to obtain a joint sponsor, or maybe your joint sponsor doesn't quite meet the income requirements, assets must equal the stated difference between the sponsor's income and the 125% of the poverty guideline. If you are a spouse or a child of a U.S. citizen, then that difference must only be equal 3 times. And all other relatives 5 times the difference, and then special applicants filing for orphans must equal the difference. So they talk about some evidence of assets that you could use. You could use bank statements from the past 12 months. Those statements must show that amount over the past 12 months on average. You may get a statement from an officer of the bank. You can also provide evidence of stocks, bonds, and certificates of deposit, or personal property value of your real estate. But you carefully need to review the Form I-864 instructions talking about assets. This kind of RFE is often also received by petitioning sponsors who have unusual income. This could be retirement income, disability income, or VA income, for example. If you are 100% sure that your petitioning sponsor still qualifies and you are not getting a joint sponsor or providing assets, you may be able to respond to this RFE by resubmitting a newly filled out Form I-864 from the petitioning sponsor and proof of current income. Or like we just said a second ago, if your sponsor's income is not necessarily reflected in the tax returns, you can also provide that additional evidence to your response and a cover letter explaining the circumstance. If you do choose to obtain a joint sponsor and have them fill out the Form I-864, you should also still redo the form from the petitioning sponsor and provide evidence one more time. Also, do not forget to include a copy of this letter with your response. At the same time, also make a copy of this letter for yourself and keep it for your own records. And then they tell you where you can submit this response. So if you're using regular USPS mail, you will send it to this address. And then if you are using express mail or courier deliveries like DHL, UPS, FedEx, then they tell you to send it to this address. Another type of RFE that people get is this one. So we're going to skip all the same parts that are the same, but this one mentions one or more deficiencies on the Form I-864 from the petitioning sponsor. So this RFE doesn't actually mention that the petitioning sponsor's income doesn't qualify. The form is filled out incorrectly. Some of the things that they point out for you that could be incorrect with your form is maybe the Form I-864 was not signed by the petitioner. They do mention that a valid signature must be handwritten. Maybe you were missing pages, or maybe the edition date was too old. Maybe you left out a social security number from the petitioner. Maybe the household size was incorrectly calculated. And that is a very frequent issue, that the household size section of that form is very glitchy and it doesn't automatically calculate it for you unless you're using Adobe Acrobat Reader, which is what I suggest you use to fill out this form. Maybe your form was actually missing the correct federal income tax return and supporting documents like W-2, 1099. So this could also mean that maybe you didn't provide the tax returns, or maybe the tax returns you provided were not the correct type. Sometimes when you download tax transcripts from the IRS site, you download the wrong type of transcript. So it could be that you provided them with an account transcript or wage and income statement, but what they're looking for is a tax return transcript. They also talk about that if you are petitioning a family member who has a derivative applicant, that they must be listed on the same form I-864 for the principal applicant. This only applies in cases where there are derivatives included on the same petition, but anybody who has to have their own I-130 petition doesn't have to worry about this note. If you are unsure about what mistake exactly you made in the form I-864, I do recommend then you go through the guide that I just made on the latest edition of the 864 to see what the mistake could have been. Now let's talk about the third type. Now this one is for those of you who preemptively submitted a joint sponsors documentation, but even after that, USCIS still cannot make a decision on your case. This first paragraph talks about how maybe your sponsor is missing a federal income tax return for the most recent tax year. Maybe, like we just talked before, you forgot to include the tax returns, or you didn't send them the correct type of tax returns transcript they're looking for. They also talk about that if the joint sponsor was not required to file the tax returns, then you need to include a written explanation why that was not required. So maybe your joint sponsor wasn't required because they are retired and it is a non-taxable income. Maybe they are on disability or VA benefits, something like that. Perhaps they didn't have to file. But unfortunately, in the case that you obtain a joint sponsor who wasn't required to file tax returns, it is very difficult to fight with USCIS about this issue. It is probably best to obtain a joint sponsor who filed taxes after all, as it will make it easier for USCIS to approve a joint sponsor who does file taxes versus the one who doesn't. And then they will also mention something like, based on the documents you submitted, they also couldn't figure out that the sponsor is qualified. They will give you all the same notes that they did with the petitioning sponsor not qualifying, where the form needs to be completed and signed, that all pages must be present, that it has to be of the latest edition date, the social security number must be listed, the household size must be calculated correctly, and you must provide federal income tax returns in addition to these additional forms like W-2, 1099, and schedules, and proof of their status in a form of being a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or a U.S. national. And again, they also say that the total income line is what they look at to determine the qualification. So once again, very similar note to what you probably have received for petitioning sponsor. And very often, if you do include the joint sponsor's information, this kind of note about the joint sponsor can also be included in the same RFE letter that also gives the same exact notes for the petitioning sponsor. In that case, you're going to have to refile both forms from the petitioner and the joint sponsor and make sure that you provide all the evidence one more time. And in some cases, you may have to just obtain a completely different joint sponsor. But I do suggest that you include a cover letter that will explain the situation that you decided to obtain a different sponsor and list out the evidence that you're going to provide in this response to request for evidence. They also talk about assets here once again, and then again, all the same information on how and where to submit your case. Let's talk about sample number 4. So in this type of RFE, your household members not qualifying for the purposes of the affidavit of support. So for example, they will say that you as a petitioning sponsor indicated on the form 864 that there are qualifying household members that will contribute to the petitioning sponsor's income. And they may say something like this, that the petitioning sponsor failed to submit the form I-864A from the household members. So in order for your sponsor's household members to be used for the affidavit of support, these household members must also provide a form I-864A if they are eligible. So the only time a household member will not sign a Form 864A is if that household member is also an intending immigrant with no dependent. So if your household member is not an intending immigrant, they must sign the Form I-864A. The form must be completed properly and signed by each household member whose income will meet the poverty guidelines. This form must also be signed by the petitioning sponsor. In the form I-864A, you will notice there are two signature areas, one for the sponsor and the second one is for the household member. So make sure that you are providing signatures from both people on that form and that they are in their correct respective areas. They also talk about, including all pages, latest edition date, and you will also then need to provide the household member's federal income tax return and supporting documents filed with the federal income tax return. Now, one other thing that you should keep in mind for the household members that they did not mention in this letter is that the household member must also provide proof of their relationship to the sponsor. And for some household members, they must also provide proof of residing together with the petitioning sponsor. Review the Form I-864A instructions. Remember to only include household members who are contributing their income. Just because they live with you doesn't mean that they have to contribute their income. And let's talk about the fifth type of affidavit of support RFE. And this one has to do with the income of the intending immigrant. The income of the intending immigrants must also be obtained while authorized to work in the United States. So any other household member doesn't really have to be in legal status in the United States to contribute their income. On the other hand, as you see in this fifth sample, the intending immigrant must be authorized to work in the United States in order to be able to use their income for the affidavit of support. And they give you examples. So either that you hold one of these visas, or providing a copy of your EAD, or providing a copy of your I-94 that says that you're authorized to work in the United States. But don't forget that aside from showing that you were authorized to work in the United States as an intending immigrant, you may also have to submit the Form I-864A if you have derivative applicants on the same visa petition. If you don't, you can ignore this message. You also, again, must refill the petitioning sponsor's form to the latest edition. Provide, again, all the evidence from the petitioning sponsor as well as all the evidence from the intending immigrant. So, these are the 5 most common types of affidavit of support RFEs that I often see from my subscribers. I separated them into 5 different types, but a lot of these RFE requests can be combined into one letter. For example, you may get one long RFE notice that says that the petitioning sponsor couldn't be determined as a qualified sponsor. In addition, they may also include a notice that the petitioning sponsor's form had deficiencies. In addition to that, they may also say that your joint sponsor doesn't qualify. The main takeaways from today's video is no matter how you decide to correct this issue on this RFE, always include a copy of the RFE letter with your response. Always refill all the forms and resubmit all the documents related to the affidavit of support. Always make a copy for your own records, as well as obtaining a proof of delivery to make sure that USCIS receives your response. Also, include a cover letter with your response explaining what changes you're making and what evidence you are submitting to them. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Bye!